Hey guys, this is Nick with Cymatics, and welcome to video number 4 in our Hip Hop Beatmaking Foundations series. In this video, we're going to be covering kicks and snares, and I know kicks and snares could be a pretty frustrating part of making the beat because a lot of times you might find that your 808 sounds really good on its own, your kick might sound really good on its own, but then when you mix them together, they tend to sound horrible. The kick either disappears or the 808 sounds really weird, and it can really kind of kill the groove. So there are a few pretty easy steps to follow to make sure that you will land on a combination of 808 and kick that really work together and bang really hard. It can take a bit of time, but it's possible and it's doable with pretty much any 808 and any kick. So without further ado, let me just play you what I have so far. And I dropped everything down by 6 decibels, roughly, because we're going to be introducing more sounds into the mix. We're going to be clipping very early, and it's actually useful to have everything below the point where it starts to clip because you can actually tell whether or not your 808 and kick are solid together. Because if it's clipping, you're not going to get an accurate picture. It'll sound distorted. So you want to make sure that for the time being, everything's quiet, everything's soft, just to make sure that the kick and 808 work together. And then when you figure out that they do, then you can start to boost everything. And we'll talk about that in the mixing, like in the mixing video, what we're going to be doing to make everything sound huge. But for now, let me just play what I have. Okay, so it's pretty quiet, but the reason why it's quiet is we're going to bring in a kick that's going to be very loud. And we want to bring in a kick that's going to be maybe like 5 decibels louder or so than the 808. Obviously, it's not a direct rule, but it might help. It just helps to know that it should be louder than your 808 by quite a significant margin in order for it to really punch through. But that's not the main reason why a lot of the biggest songs you hear have like a really good 808 and kick combination where everything is really solid and gelled together. It's not just that the kick is really loud, it's also that the kick and 808 have their phase coherent, so they're lock in with, in terms of their phase. So the 808 waveform has a phase, and the phase is simply basically the positioning of this wave, whether it's positioned left or right. I'm not going to go into the details of what that means, it's not really relevant. But you can think of it this way: when the waveform of the kick and the waveform of the 808 have their peaks and valleys opposite one another, so the 808 has a kick, has a peak, whereas the kick has a valley in this area. That means they're out of phase, and that's going to mean they're going to cancel each other out, and the kick is going to disappear in the 808. If you want your kick to be really strong and punch through with the 808 and mesh together with the 808, then the kick has to have its peaks correspond to the peaks of the 808. Then they're going to be like one sample. They're going to come together. So this is largely it largely depends on the 808 sample you have, the pitch of the 808 sample, the notes you're using with the 808, the 808 tonality, because a lot of the times you can have 2 different 808s with the same note, but they have a different tone to them, so they have a different characteristic in terms of its phase. So it's not there's no catch-all solution for this other than using your ears and listening to what is going on with the kick in 808. If you notice that the kick is disappearing, that means it's out of phase. And how do we fix that? Well, let's first throw in a kick. And in terms of kick selection, I typically find I like kicks that aren't too hard clipped. Like that's fine, but I like a shorter, more compact kick that has some bite to it, but that isn't too hard clipped at the same time. So something with bite, but that's shorter and not too much low end. It's not too boomy. That to me might be a bit boomy. This kind of stuff, these kind of kicks, that's what I'm looking for. It's compact, it's tight, and it doesn't have too much low end because the low end is going to be coming from your 808, not the kick. The kick is just there to give you that thumping feeling in your chest, but the 808 is where all the low end and sub comes from. I'm okay with that sample. Now we're going to load in a sampler, simpler. Take our kick and throw it in. I'm not concerned about the note of the kick. It's not really relevant because our notes in the 808 change all the time and it's misleading. It's not necessarily true that if you take an 808 that's a C sharp, that if you have a kick in a C sharp, they're going to be in phase and sound great together. It's not always true. So I just kind of go by ear and I kind of look for that particular set of criteria. I want to have a short, compact kick that has bite and that isn't too boomy. So now we place our kick, make sure the velocity is maxed out, that the note is very loud. Over here in FL Studio and other DAWs, you'll have a different representation of velocity, but here in live, that's how you see it. And let's just stack it, my 808 and my kick, and let's just see in solo together what it sounds like. So our 808 is boomy. It's good, it sounds good, but notice how if we solo the kick, it's got all this nice low end, but as soon as we bring it into the 808, that low end disappears. Again, totally different sample, and now it sounds awful. What does this tell you? It tells you it's out of phase, but it's a very easy problem to solve. You just get some kind of a utility plugin, which every single DAW has to have, and invert the phase. So invert the polarity. You're going to see this little symbol with a 0 with a cross through it. That means the phase polarity button, okay? Just press that. If you have two of them, left and right, press both of them. Now, look at that. They gel perfectly. If I undo it, it's garbage. And now they sound like they're the same part of the same sample. Okay. Totally different. All I had to do was invert the phase. Okay, that's the secret sauce to get your kicks to work. If you're still not getting it to work, then you got to pick a different sample for the kick. If that's not working, then you have to transpose the kick up and down a few semitones to find that place where it starts to bang. And if you hear that it starts to bang, try inverting the polarity back and forth to get it all the way there, basically. If it bangs when it's quiet like this, that means it's going to bang when you bring everything up in the mix. So I'm very happy about it. So again, as soon as you hear that there's problems going on in the kick and 808, it's almost always phase, and a lot of different things can change the phase. It can be inverting it with a button like this. It could be transposing it, because if you transpose it, the actual wave of the kick gets extended or shortened, and that also changes the phase. So that can help you in that situation. Now, my only piece of advice is when you figure this out, don't worry too much about using EQ and stuff, because if now you start using EQ actually changes the phase of your kick, of whatever it touches actually, especially in the low end where you have wavelengths that are very long. It'll change the phase, and you've worked so hard to find the phase, to match the phase of the 808 and kick together. And now if you change the low end information with an EQ, you're actually modifying the phase relationship. So if you really need to do that, then do it, but also keep in mind that your phase does change and that you might need to invert it back. So cool. So now that we have this 808 relationship figured out, you might have a problem where some notes fall through while others are solid. You're never going to get a perfectly coherent kick drum through every single 808 note. You need to get a kick drum that is solid through the most important notes of your beat, which to me is this note, E, because that's the tonic of the scale. It appears the most often. And you need to have a kick that is like acceptable through all the other notes. If it totally disappears, then you have to find a different sample or transpose the kick up and down until it fits in between those notes, so that the fundamental tone of the kick literally falls in between like a C and a D, so it's a C sharp, so that it doesn't clash with those two notes. It does, and then you adjust the phase accordingly when you figure that out. So it's really trial and error. There's no surefire way of doing it, but every single engineer that mixes a record for the radio, a hip-hop record, they do this because there's no other way to make it really solid. And so once you have that figured out, I mean, the rest is easy. You kind of just write your own beat, get it to groove. I like to place the kicks in between the 808s, sometimes on top, sometimes a totally different groove altogether. So here I might put it here. I kind of like that. And notice how, since we figured out the phase situation, the kicks sound good on their own, and they also sound good on top of the 808. So I can play them aside from the 808. I can play them on their own, and it always sounds the same level. Like there's no level change. And sometimes I'll let the 808s do their own job, because if you have a very snappy, sharp 808, you don't always need to drop a kick on top of it, you know? Like that last one's fine. It can just roll on its own. Sometimes I do like a lower velocity kick when there's a very short or fast riff of notes like this. I do a lower velocity kick here so that it's not as aggressive. Or we can do it here. Because otherwise, if it's too loud, it's a bit too much of a barrage of kicks. Cool. Now that we have that, let's go on to the snare. So the snare, clap, rim, whatever, that's really up to you, which one you choose. It kind of depends on the loop, but we can audition various kinds right now. It's not as complicated because the snares and claps, they don't have that much low end information, so you're not going to phase out too heavily with your 808, but that does happen. So if you find that your snare disappears in the 808, that means it's out of phase. So you just invert the phase of the snare and it's going to be sharp. It's going to come through better. So if I find like a clap, so what I don't like about this clap, it sounds good on its own, but when you put it in the context of a beat, it's a bit too high pitched. So what I do is I transpose claps a lot. That's a lot better. And here I usually just hot swap and see which clap I like. And since I have to transpose it back to normal, I like that. That's cool too. It's hard to pick. I kind of like this one because it almost has a snare characteristic to it in the low end. And it sits nicely on top of the kick, like here. So they are phase aligned. Cool. But you can also experiment with snares. So what I do is I drop in a snare sample of some kind. Again, I want a thuddy, short snare that has low end in it, but also not too boomy and has a nice snap. I like that. That's cool. I really like that first one, to be honest. can mix the clap and the snare. So notice how the claps, they can still be strong, they can still be, they're way less like thuddy in the low end, they're not as punchy, but they still can play a big role in the beat, but it's not as kind of, it doesn't assert itself in the drum track as much as the snare does. It's more laid back. And this is largely a matter of taste. This starts to be a bit more, it kind of premises around the quarter notes, around it's more stressed on the quarter notes than the clap. The clap is more waiting for the next kick drum to come. So if you want a beat that has, it's more focused on the low end, on your 808s, on your kicks, then you kind of, you maybe want to have a clap, because the clap has less low end, and the kicks and 808s will have more of a, they'll shine more in the mix. So if you have a loop that wants more groovy 808 with a lot more kicks in it, and the low end groove is very important to the beat, then you might go for a loop. But if you're just going for like simple 808s and you want a really strong, powerful drum track, then a snare might be the way to go. A happy medium actually tends to be a rim, so I like rims a lot for that reason. Rims kind of, they do a different thing. They're very short, and they give you that impact of a snare, but without the shine of the clap. You kind of land somewhere in between, and it can sound really cool, especially if you have a very pretty melody and you want the melody to shine, right? So it's about what you want to shine. If the melody is very expansive and nice and has a lot of nuances in it, then the rim will give you that impact rhythmically, but it'll also give you space for the melody to do its thing. Oops. It's completely, and actually a lot of the times you might go from a rim in one part of the beat and switch to a clap or a snare in the second part of the beat. I like short ones like this. Excellent. So we have like 3 candidates. And they all hit hard in their own way. I feel like the snare, I'm not going to go with the snare, it's either probably the rim, because it has a very lazy vibe, but it's also very strong in the mix and very rhythmically assertive. So I hope you guys learned something roughly about how to make sure that everything sounds strong in the mix when it comes to your kicks and your snares, which are the most important to get right in a hip hop song. Hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.